Speaker this afternoon is Sophia Beach, who is a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party and also student organiser. Sophia, welcome, and over to you, 30 minutes.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jenny. And thanks, everyone, for coming to discuss this. Hopefully, everyone's enjoyed Marxism so far as much as I have. As Jenny said, the title of this meeting is From Spiking to Harassment, Why Does Sexism Run So Deep? And this is the question I want to try and answer today. Because, listen, it's always an important question to try and answer. But actually, I feel like it's a particularly significant time to be discussing this topic when you look at the world around us. And that's because, quite frankly, it feels like a terrifying time to be a woman. Despite what we're told by the top of society, the so-called gains that we've made over the years, the legal, the political equality that we're meant to have, life for many is far, far away from this liberal narrative. And actually, in every corner of the world, women's rights are being attacked and rolled back. I think the most terrifying thing is what we have to start with. And that's the news that we heard last week about the attacks on abortion rights in the US. Now, for anyone who was in the opening rally last night, you could have heard Virginia from the States talk about it amazingly. And there are other sessions that are going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but I think, we have to discuss it. Because the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, something that women fought for nearly 50 years ago, which gave women access to safe and legal abortions in America, is not just an attack on the millions of women in America, but it's an attack on women across the world. And actually, the rolling back of Roe versus Wade is going to have an immediately disastrous effect for millions of these women. 13 states across the US had trigger bans in place, essentially to ban abortions as soon as the decision was made to be overturned. And look, it has to be said as well that actually before Roe versus Wade was overturned, it was already pretty tricky to get an abortion in America. 89% of counties did not have a clinic where abortion was offered, which meant mainly the women who had the money or time to be able to travel were the only ones who could access it. But now, with the decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, this is going to be made nigh on impossible to get access to legal abortions for millions of women. And as I said, we have to be clear that this is an attack on all of us, on women's rights across the world. Because the state, the church, and the right in America have lined up to smash women's right to bodily autonomy and to abortion. And many are saying that this is just the beginning, aren't they? I mean, what comes next? Access to contraception, same-sex marriage. I mean, the threats are endless. And I mean, what does Joe Biden think we should do? He says, don't act now. Let's not resist now. Let's wait till November. Wait till the midterms. Because, an electoral strategy is what's managed to protect women's rights so far in America already. I mean, I don't have any faith that they're going to be able to protect it in the future. And this decision is the legacy of the racist, homophobic, transphobic, and sexist presidency of Donald Trump, isn't it? This is what he set out to do. And actually, it was 5 years ago, under Donald Trump's presidency, that we saw an explosive movement erupt, one that spread worldwide and took up the question of women's rights, sexism in society, and women's experience of sexual violence. And it was called the #MeToo movement. And actually, those 5 years ago, it felt like there was genuinely a shift in society, didn't it? It felt that, finally, women were being listened when they talk about sexual abuse. But actually, the most recent Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial and the representation of Amber Heard in the media, which, to be honest, spawned a level of misogyny not seen for years. I mean, with that, you'd think Me Too never had happened. Because it was actually a complete rolling back of Me Too, wasn't it? What was the central question of Me Too? It was that women who speak out about sexual abuse, sexual violence, or harassment should be taken seriously and they should be believed. And actually, with the outcome of the trial and the ridicule and vilification that Amber Heard faced in the media, it seems that anything but. And actually, it was about, particularly when men in the public eye or in power, when those accusations are made against them, this was when it was particularly important. And once again, it's the right-wing press, the top of society, clamping down on the gains that women have made. I mean, you can make another example, Prince Andrew, with the accusations made by him against Virginia Giuffre. I mean, he is able to still pay his way out of these deals and back deals and walk freely. Now, of course, it has to be said that both of these women are also in slightly more fortunate positions than most victims of sexual assault. They at least have the money to afford these lengthy and expensive court trials. But then imagine what kind of message that sends to the rest of us. When even Amber Heard isn't believed, that is not going to give any other women even more confidence to speak out against their abusers. And this is already difficult for women here. The justice system and conviction rates already make this hard for victims. 90% of domestic abuse cases in the UK don't end in charges, and convictions for those have fallen by 35% in the last 5 years, which is a record low. And these figures are shocking, actually, when you think that 1 in 3 women will experience domestic abuse or some form of domestic harassment or violence, and when 2 women a week on average are murdered by their current or ex-partners. I think something has to be done. Now, the title of this meeting also refers to the horrid experiences that a number of young women and students faced this last year. We saw an absolute explosion of cases of spiking on uni campuses and in nightclubs, with some people even reporting being spiked with a syringe. And despite walkouts, protests, and calls on nightclubs to have better searches and anti-spiking facilities, there was no justice. Very rarely is spiking taken up as police by a criminal case. But I mean, should this really surprise us about the police? The brutal murder of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa are tragic examples of the most extreme sexism that women face every single day. So much so that we cannot even walk down the street without being harassed or harmed. And the supposed institution that's meant to protect women from this fear, i.e. the police, are now the ones who are committing the crimes. I mean, let's be clear, the police were never there to protect us, if that wasn't clear enough already. And not only do the police not take rape and domestic abuse cases seriously, not only in some cases are they the ones committing these crimes, now they also strip search young girls, children, in their schools. Male police officers in the case of Child Q, who strip searched a 15-year-old girl. I mean, this is the state and the sexist and racist institution that the police are. And look, it feels like a lifetime ago as well, but I think we have to talk about lockdown. In lockdown, women's rights were rolled back to the 1970s, according to a spokesperson from the TUC. Domestic abuse skyrocketed, but also, of course, it was women who took up the brunt of the homeschooling, looking after sick, elderly family members, whilst also predominantly being on the front lines. Nurses, carers, cleaners. When they weren't on the front lines, they were the most likely to be furloughed and sacked. Speaking of jobs as well, on average, women are still paid 16% less than men, despite the Equal Pay Act that was passed in 1970. And it has to be said as well that actually in many sectors, this gap is far, far bigger, particularly because the most underpaid jobs in society are often done by women. And of course, we have to mention the cost of living crisis as well. We've spoken a lot about it this weekend. We will for the rest of today and tomorrow. But it is and of course, the cost of living crisis is affecting everyone, bar the greedy minority at the top. But with rent, food and fuel prices on the rise and a record number of people using food banks, it will be women who are left to pick up the pieces. So what I'm trying to say here, the picture I'm trying to paint for you, is that sexism and the experiences that women have in society soaks into every single aspect of our lives. The home, the workplace, the streets, it's on the TV, the internet. It is utterly entrenched and completely inescapable in the current society that we have today. I mean, sexism does not just run deep, it runs through the very veins of the system that we live in. It is entirely essential to it. And also, the all-encompassing nature of sexism, it means that there's a number of debates, aren't there, about where sexism comes from, how we get rid of it, even if we can get rid of it. And there's quite a common argument that people might have seen that I have to just dispel a little bit, because there is an argument known as biological determinism. This is the idea that somehow sexism is natural. It's inherent, that there are biological differences between men and women. I mean, we've all heard those phrases, all men are trash, all men are pigs, that sort of form of feminism. This idea that men are naturally prone to violence, and that means women are actually naturally passive and just victims. But I mean, this line of argument, it doesn't explain where these ideas come from. let alone how to get rid of them. And also, most importantly, it lends itself to some of the rampant transphobic arguments that we've seen in society today. You know, this idea that there's something inherent, biological, about being a man and a woman. So, of course, we have to reject this. You know, we want to focus on the material arguments, don't we? About where sexist ideas come from and how they have such dominance in society. And whilst we reject every single individual instance of sexism, the problem is not an individual one. It is utterly systemic. I mean, after all, men are not born as babies with sexist ideas in their heads, are they? These ideas are taught to us. There is nothing natural or inevitable about sexism. So when Karl Marx, a man that I'm sure you've all heard of after coming to this Marxism festival, when he says that the ruling ideas of society are the ideas of the ruling class, this is what he means. I went through all the ways that sexism permeates society. It has to come from somewhere, and it comes from the top, actually. It comes from the MPs, the media. It comes from the state and the church. And actually, if you think about these sections in society, this is actually where sometimes sexism is most rife, isn't it? I mean, when MPs think that they can get away with watching porn in Parliament whilst being paid by taxpayers' money, or if you think about rugby culture at university, the Bullingdon types from Eton who go to Oxbridge and so on, even down to Angela Rayner being told that she was distracting Boris Johnson by crossing and uncrossing her legs while sitting in the House of Commons. I mean, these ideas, they fester right up at the top of society, don't they? And they trickle down and they affect all of us, and they affect us all to serve a very clear purpose. And it has to be said as well that despite sexism being one of the oldest, one of the most entrenched forms of oppression, it hasn't always existed. For a large majority of human civilization, we lived in communities that didn't have gender roles, where men and women weren't separated. There weren't separate jobs for women and men. Sexism only arose right alongside the very first class societies and with private property. I don't have time to go into it. Please do ask questions in the discussion if you want to know. And it takes a very, very particular and unique form under capitalism. So rather than attitudes towards women being bound up with our biology, they actually stem from how society is organised. And that is especially around the centrality of the family as an institution and women's role within them. It is this, the family, that is the root of women's oppression today. Now, look, I want to be clear. I'm not attacking people's individual families and familial relationships. I mean, many of us don't even live in this sort of conventional nuclear family, you know, husband, wife, children, in this society that often we see dominating on TV and in magazines. I'm not attacking that. What I am attacking, though, is the ideological dominance that this type of family has in society. And it's where women's role in society is laid out, and it's how ideas about us are formed. And it affects every single one of us, consciously or subconsciously. Because the family is essential to the rich and the 1%, and to capitalism. Firstly, because the economic role that the family plays is insurmountable. I mean, if you just think about it, all of us living in little individual boxes of flats and houses. It helps the market and the economy, doesn't it? It helps the greedy landlords when they can charge us all horrible rates of rent for living in shoe boxes. But it helps the market. Everyone's got to have a TV. Everyone's got to have a radio. Every woman's got to have a washing machine. If she's lucky, she can have a dishwasher as well, from broadband licenses, TV licenses. You know, there's a massive profit industry for having us all separated off. But mainly, the economic benefit of the family to those at the top is the unpaid housework that women do. The cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing, caring for elderly family members. All of this saves the state trillions of pounds every single year. And also, if you think about it, childcare costs are through the roof. If you're someone who's earning the average wage of 25k a year, a lot of us are on a lot less than that, by the way, you will spend 54% of your wage looking after children under the age of 2. And to cover this cost, or rather I should say to avoid this cost, 2/3 of women will reduce their hours of work after having kids, compared to 26% of men. I mean, this is totally unsustainable. So what happens instead? Elder female families take up the work. I mean, I don't know about you lot, but I spent every single day after primary school at my nan's house waiting for my mum to pick me up. I'm sure that's actually something that will resonate with a lot of people in this room. And actually, when women do the work, it's completely unappreciated. It's undervalued and it's underpaid. I mean, 95% of childcare workers are on poverty wages. But it's not just them, is it? It's the carers, the cleaners. If anyone saw Bella speak at the opening rally yesterday, what she spoke about were women cleaners asking for better pay. They ain't greedy, that's what they deserve. But even to nurses who are forced to use food banks. And look, I mentioned the cost of living crisis at the start. And it is women who carry the burdens of cutbacks to services, of austerity and recessions. So when Rishi Sunak, when he says that people who are using food banks or people who are choosing to heat their homes and have a hot meal, when he says that people just need to budget better or shop smarter, like go to Asda, as if he's ever been to an Asda in his life, when he says that that's what people need to do, he's not talking about all of us, is he? He's talking about women, because it's women who do the food shop. It's women who budget for the house. The men go out and do the work. Then, we make sure that all the money for the bills is paid. Then he can have his pub money and go off with it. And actually, I think it's a bit rich from a man who's a billionaire and hangs out with people like Boris Johnson, who does not even know how much a loaf of bread costs. So when child benefits are capped at 2 children, when disability benefits are slashed, when wages don't match the rate of inflation, all of these burdens fall on the shoulders of women, with no help from the state, because the institution of the family will let them off the hook. But the family also plays an ideological role too. It is where children are socialised. It's where attitudes are taught, and it is absolutely structured into society. From family deals in supermarkets to family deals at travel agents, to endless reality TV series about love and relationships, one of which I'm not going to name, but I'm very embroiled in at the moment, unashamedly, I should say, to women being interrogated about their pregnancy plans in job interviews. It completely shapes our lives and people's perceptions of us. And it's ideological because it is in the family and in the home where our roles, particularly as women, are laid out for us. And that is why it's where sexist ideas stem from. The fact that we must be the primary child rearers and caregivers. And the fact that women do this, not because nobody else will, by the way, but it's because that's what women want, isn't it? We're told that we're naturally caring. We all want to be mothers. It's every little girl's dream to grow up and to be attractive so she can find a man. And that man, she wants him to provide for her, settle down with her, have kids. Then the woman has to make sure that she stays attractive so said man doesn't leave her for a younger, more attractive versions of herself. And then she has to go on, making everyone happy, making everyone tea, are you all right, love, with a smile on your face, making dinner, an endless cycle until we all drop dead. I mean, what a life, what a life. I mean, who would have want more, do you know what I mean? It sounds like a great life to me. It's absolutely ridiculous. And look, now I just want to read you out a quote from our Prime Minister Boris Johnson and what he thinks about women who fail to meet this sort of attainable standard of the perfect family home. This is what he thinks about it. It's a quote when he wrote it as a journalist in The Spectator back in the 90s, but I'm sure he still believes it today. He says, "I blame the male sex for the appalling proliferation of single mothers." Thanks, Boris, at least it's not our fault. Which is costing us all £9.1 billion a year, and which is producing a generation of ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate children who will be paying for our pensions. Bit rich, I think, coming from him, a man that no one knows how many bloody kids he's got in the first place. But this is the important bit. Then he goes on to say, "It is no use blaming uppity and irresponsible women for becoming pregnant in the absence of a husband, given their natural desire to have babies. Something must be found to restore women's desire to be married. And that means addressing the feebleness of the modern Briton, his reluctance or inability to take control of his women and be head of his household." I mean, look, there is so much in that quote. You could do a whole bloody meeting on what he just wrote in the 1995. There's so much to unpack that I don't have time there for. But what I think it shows is the real role of the family and women's role within it, and what those people at the top of society think the family is meant to be about. So look, it might be a really big jump to make from the examples that I gave at the beginning of sexism and that women face in society. This is a big jump to make, isn't it? How is it that the family and its role in society is the reason that my drink will get spiked in a nightclub, or that I will get catcalled on the street? Well, what is it then that ties every single individual experience of sexism together? What is it that links them all? It's women's assumed role in society, isn't it? And that comes from the family. You know, this idea of the sort of bleak and uninspiring duty that I just laid out. The one that Boris Johnson and others think women should be doing and expect from us. You know, the fact that women can just be seen as empty reproductive vessels and their bodies can be treated as such with no respect. The unattainable beauty standards that we see on social media. The fact that in those nightclubs where women are getting spiked, they are sold as a product. They're commodified. I mean, they're given free entry to lure the men who are spiking them inside in these nightclubs. I mean, from advertising to cosmetic surgery, businesses and the top have profited off of the commodification, the objectification, and the systematic oppression of women. And all of these are the ideas about women, the ideas about the family and its importance. They're forced down our throats every single day, aren't they? I mean, it's absolutely inescapable. Just think about one of the most famous families. Now, look, I know what you're thinking. I'm not going to talk about the Kardashians, right? I'm actually going to talk about the royal family. I mean, from sickening jubilees to balcony parades, they represent actually the epitome of what all of our families are meant to be like, don't they? From the extravagant weddings, the constant churning out of kids. I mean, I can't keep up with, it seems like they're popping one out every couple of weeks at this rate, you can't keep up. And I mean, look, I'm no fan of the Queen, right? But even the Queen cannot escape this idea of being a mother. I mean, she's a mother to the nation, after all, isn't she? Now, look, let's be honest. Well, or is she? You know, well, let's be honest. Firstly, none of the women in the royal family look after their own kids or clean their palaces, for starters. But I'm just saying how high up this sort of role of the family goes. But speaking about the top of society, you know, the upper echelons, those that supposedly care so much about the families and family values that we're always told about, the ones that hold the family in such high regard, almost as this sacred institution, they are actually the ones that ruin people's lives. They ruin people's lives so much that it leads to the breakdown and the destruction of families. You know, they don't care about elderly family members when they cut care services, when they cut care and essential services. They don't care about the sick when they cut benefits and they underfund the NHS. And do you know what? They don't even care about the kids. Even kids aren't safe from the Tory grip and capitalism in society when they slash free school meals and underfund and slash education spending. But also, I think, and most importantly, they are the people who tear families apart in the most brutal of ways. From family detention centres like Yoleswood to deportation flights to Rwanda. All of a sudden, families don't matter when racist deportations and the hostile environment takes precedent. And actually it was a woman, wasn't it? Theresa May, who came up with the hostile environment all those years ago. And this leads me on really to my last point about how we can win a world free of sexism. Because it has to be said, sexism is something that every single woman experiences. But let's be clear, we don't all experience it the same, and we certainly do not all experience it equally. Some women, they have a vested interest in maintaining the sexism that people face, and that's the women of the ruling class, because they're part of a class that makes all of the profit off of the exploitation of women, the objectification of women that I've spoken about already. You know, they make a profit and want to maintain the system that I've spoken about, the one that burdens mothers, the one that puts pressure on teenage girls, and the one that ultimately produces violence against women. And this is why the path to liberation, it cannot lie within the system that we have currently. It's not about breaking glass ceilings. Let's be clear, most women aren't even thinking about the glass ceiling, they're cleaning sticky floors. It's not about having more female MPs. It's not about having more CEOs. Because this is quite a common line of argument, isn't it, nowadays? This sort of girl boss type feminism. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think giving women equal opportunity to exploit workers is any kind of solution to the sexism that women face in society. And it certainly will not change the material and the ideological role that the family plays in society. And actually, I mean, I couldn't imagine anything worse. Like, the last thing I want to see is more Priti Patels and Cressida Dicks in this world, to be honest. Look, I don't want more girl bosses. I want to get rid of bosses entirely. I don't think they should exist at all. I think we do a much better job than all of them, regardless of their gender. So quite frankly, we cannot get rid of sexism whilst capitalism remains. And that's because of the title of this meeting. It really does run that deep. And the way that women have got any change or made any goals in society has actually always been for collective and mass struggle. From the right to vote to access to abortions. This has all been won through strikes and protests. And actually, it's how any minority or any oppressed group has got changed in society. I mean, think about the weekend, something that we take for granted. Workers had to fight for that. I mean, think about the civil rights movement. It wasn't the White House, it was the sit-ins, it was the Selma marches that made the civil rights movement. I mean, Stonewall, that was a bloody riot, for God's sake. I mean, this is how we win our rights in society. We have to fight for them because nothing has ever been handed to us on a plate. And actually, we've always had to fight for it together. Men, women, black, white, gay, straight, cis or trans, because it's all of our fight. The only group in society who benefits from sexism or any kind of oppression is the ruling class, those that call the shots and make the profits off of it. And that's why we have to fight as a class against them. Because they try and divide us, don't they, to maintain their rule and status quo. Why do they try and divide us? Because I'll tell you, it's not rocket science. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. And that's why these divides in society are so important. But it's also why we have a material basis for unity. Because a win for one of us is a win for all of us. This is something that we've spoken about today. We've seen it this weekend. Seen it most recently with the RMT strikes, the amazing speakers who spoke at the rally yesterday, the people who have been out on strike, calling for better pay. It's not just about the train workers. It's about the teachers. It's about the postal workers. It's about the telecom workers, the nurses. We want everyone to struggle and go out on strike. And it's worth noting that, on those picket lines, a large majority of them are women. And they link arm in arm with their male workers. And we hope that they win. And actually from Russia in 1917, when female factory workers went on strike and threw snowballs into the neighbouring factory, the male neighbouring factory, calling them to join them, to Egypt in 2011, where women and men were at the forefront of a revolution that toppled 30 years of Mubarak's brutal dictatorship, to the ongoing struggles that we see now, whether it be Sudan, the fight for abortion rights, even the climate movement, which is, led by young teenage girls from across the world, if you think about it. And that's because when we rage against the system, when we take all of these things in their totality, we challenge more than just a single issue. We challenge capitalism in its entirety. And actually, we challenge the roles that capitalism's given us. Those horrible roles where women are just meant to keep quiet and look after everyone that I spoke about in this meeting. We actually take agency into our own hands when we struggle and resist against the system, and we say enough is enough. And look, liberation is a very hard thing to define. I certainly can't define it in a sentence. But I do know what liberation doesn't mean. It doesn't just mean equality in a system where most of us are unequal. That is not what liberation is. Liberation is a different vision of a completely different society. And actually, the need for that society is becoming increasingly urgent because of not just what I've spoken about today, but because of every single issue that's raised in every single meeting in this festival. We don't want to have to come back next year, next decade, next generation, next century, talking about the same sexist crap that women have faced for far too long. And that means we have to smash this system starting now. So thanks everyone for listening. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
We've got a roving mic, so if you do want to ask a question or make a point, please raise your hand and I'll take you, not necessarily in the order that I see you, so don't get, I'll try and note everybody down. I'm going to ask you to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'm going to wave this blue card. After 3 minutes, I'm going to raise the red card. And if you go on, then I should just tell you in no uncertain terms to shut up.
Damn right.
So, over to you.
Hi guys, this was a great discussion. I have to say, back in Ireland, this has been something, about spiking, it's become a it was probably something that happened for quite a long time, but it's only started to slowly become into the media domain. Like, for example, the Garda, one of the high-ranking police officers in Ireland quoted that about 73 incidents were reported, but the reality is probably is much higher, because statistically there's very few rape convictions in the courts, and if you come before one particular judge, it doesn't matter his name, but basically there's a maximum jail term of 7 years, but in most likely, if anyone is convicted, it's usually up to a year with 6 months or 8 months or 12 months suspended, something like that. Other issues that came up in Ireland the last few years, pre-pandemic, somebody might have heard about around Me Too, was the Paddy Jackson trial in Belfast. There was like an emergence of a WhatsApp conversation about his teammates put up very vulgar and sexist comments, and literally how they roasted the victim, how Paddy roasted victims, and others roasted the woman concerned. And also, at the highest level of, if you like, corporation life, the former CEO of Ryanair made the most disgraceful sexist remark, and it went viral at the time. It was towards the end of the first decade of the millennium, when he turned to a German lady translator that I hope she's very good at giving blowjobs. It went quite viral. Now there's so many things I'll go on about. You mentioned a few jobs there, and I'm going to mention SNAs and security guards that are also working on the front line, and they never get mentioned when it comes to front line. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, it's not what's the word? I'll think of it afterwards. But anyway, it's not. But anyway, what I would say in summing up, it's something that we've tried to mention in Ireland as regards sex education. When you go to college, there's political science. Yeah, we need more discussions at secondary school level around consent, sex education, and social media, and how we deal with breakups and how we use social media. It's a big evolving discussion.
Can you stop
Stop
now?
there.
Right. Thanks very much. Person in the white. In the white denim jacket, kind of back a bit, and long. Yeah.
I just wanted to start by saying that is one of the most powerful talks I've ever heard. I'm so happy to be here. This is the first time I've been at the Marxist Festival, and I think this entire weekend, so far, this has been the best one I've been to. I'm so glad I came. I thought when you were talking about sexism, and when you were talking about how it stemmed from multiple different things, but you focused on the household initially, and I thought that was a really interesting area to discuss that I've not ever really seen talked about before on such a scale. It's not really talked about in social media and stuff, sexism is, but that specific aspect isn't. And I just wanted to talk about the kind of sexualization of it as well, because I think when you look at it, it's this, I just started university for politics, so I'm still very new to a lot of these terms. The one thing we learned about was this idea of the double bind, and this idea that you're meant to be innocent and feminine and beautiful, while also caring for the children and working 2 jobs, possibly more, to provide for the family. But don't provide too much, because that's the man's job. You don't want to make him feel too bad about that. And I think this sexualization as well of cleaning as well, you see it especially in Eastern Asian women. It's like the maid and having to do all that. They're innocent and they're pure, and you see this in media hidden behind. It's called the Born Yesterday trope, which I thought was really interesting. It's this idea there. I'm trying to think of some examples of it. But basically, they are like an alien species or something, but they have a big chest and luscious hips and all this kind of stuff, but they know nothing about sex. And it's for their male counterparts to tell them all about that while they explore it. And I think you can find this when you're talking about the household. I thought especially the first comment that was made there was really excellent as well about sex education, and I think as well sex education feeds into a lot of heteronormative ideas, and like as a bisexual woman, I never learned anything, let alone straight sex and straight relationships. I never learned anything about lesbian relationships or being with women or non-binary people. And yeah, I thought both of you were very, very good, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for all of that, it was great. I just wanted to sort of pick up something that was in my mind anyway, but it kind of feeds into what the comrade over there was talking about, and the last person actually as well, a little bit about sex education. And I'm an ex-teacher, but I now still work with schools, and I have seen lots of policies and RSE policies and things like that. I know a lot of schools are doing a lot of good work, or how it looks like in their policies and what it looks like on their curriculum, are doing a lot of good work around sex education, looking at different types of relationships, and it's more about healthy relationships, and also lots of work around consent and things like that. But that kind of brings me back to thinking about how sort of ingrained the sexism is, and how there's this idea of kind of a biological difference between men and women, and the fact that like also men have got this raging testosterone and can't possibly help themselves and can't be blamed for how they might act towards women. And I see a lot of school policies, so you can have, and also in terms of like the Everyone's Invited website and the kind of reaction to that, and even the government, the DFE had to put out guidance to schools because it was so horrific. And even with all of that happening, and schools doing really good work around consent and everything, I also see a lot of school uniform policies. And I was looking at one just a couple of days ago from a school, and the uniform policy, so the people that were in uniform, it was a school that had ties, blazing ties. Ties were compulsory for boys but optional for girls. But anyway, that aside, the guidance for sixth form was that they mustn't wear, that it should be, smart or whatever, and they shouldn't wear anything offensive or sexually provocative or likely to distract, cause distraction, or likely to cause embarrassment or misinterpretation. Now that didn't say the girls, but we all know that meant the girls, right? So I just, schools on the one hand are trying to do this good work, and yet it runs so deep. And a couple of years ago I wrote to my own daughter's school because I didn't like their uniform, their guidance for sixth form, because it mentioned about, if you're wearing a top, it has to cover. If you're wearing leggings, you must wear a top that covers your bottom or something. So I wrote very nicely to them about it, and it's all changed now. They've got a much better one. But I just think it shows how ingrained it is. And in terms of like a personal crusade, if you work at all with schools, if you've got children in school, look at the uniform policies and look at what that says to young women, and look at what it says about how long their skirt has to be. Look at if it mentions anything about modesty or anything like that, and have it out with these schools, because they can do all the good work they can try and do, but if the message they're sending to their young women is, we cannot protect you from this kind of misogyny, we are not prepared to fight the prejudice and the oppression that you've got in a whole school approach, you're responsible for keeping yourself covered up. These are the messages that a lot of girls are still getting at school, so get on that bandwagon, please.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you, by the way. That was a fantastic talk. Like it's been pointed out already, it was very well structured. I liked it. I think something I liked about it as well was it started with like current issues, but then you kind of zoomed out of the picture and contextualized it. So I like that. So I just wanted to say on abortion, it's apparent that the Democrats are doing nothing as well. Like when Obama was elected, he ran on codifying Roe versus Wade into law. And then as soon as he got into power, he turned his back on that and he said, we should be focusing on, bipartisan policies and things that both sides of the aisle can use. And so he just turned his back on women as soon as he got into power. Also, another thing about abortion is how it affects working class women of color the most. You see all these Republicans in the red states and their wives, their daughters are still going to have access to abortion. It's those women who are, working class, who are women of color, who are going to have to come up with the money to travel out of state to get to a clinic to have an abortion. It's also been proven over and over again that banning safe and legal abortion only leads to a higher rate of backstreet or back alley abortions, which leads to women or carriers dying, which is a very pro-life argument because they're for life and for protecting life, but not if you're the woman carrying the child. Another thing with that is obviously there have been protests in the US since Roe v. Wade was repealed, and with that comes police violence, and part of that is firing tear gas into the crowds. Tear gas is actually an abortifacient, which is something that's known as a drug that causes miscarriages, and so what they're doing is firing drugs that can cause miscarriages into a crowd of women who they've just taken rights away from. It's a lot going on in America. Something else I wanted to point out, thank you, is when you moved on in your talk, Sophia, to talking about sort of the ruling class and exploitation, an example that came to mind is Kylie Jenner and how, she's the first female billionaire, how she's in Forbes magazine because, that should be celebrated. Of course, as socialists, we know that's not the case. But what wasn't talked about was, she may be seen as a girl boss, but what about the pain she's inflicting on, Bangladeshi sweatshop workers, on women in those sweatshop workers, on mothers in those sweatshops, and the effects of that? What are the effects on those people? So I think it was a very interesting point you made about ruling class women and how they're, fighting to keep the current system in place. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant.
And I like one at the very beginning of your talk, you said before class society there was no division of labour according to men and women. I think that's a very important point. And I think it contradicts a little bit Engels, what I've got in my memory, about the importance of the plough, leading to the division of labour between men and women because the plough is so difficult. If you look at that argument a bit more closely, what is, for instance, agriculture? Agriculture consists not only of digging the earth at the beginning or whatever in spring, it also consists of reaping the stuff, looking after the what you call it, beans, whatever, making sure they don't rot, and so on and so forth. So it's a whole complicated work thing, and women and men play an equal role. So what I'm trying to get at is, I think that it's not the division of labour which led to women's oppression, it's the state. The state comes first, and oppression and exploitation on a big level comes first, and within that setup, women's oppression gets promoted by the ruling class. I think that's important to get the history right.
I think it feels at the moment like there's a lot of setbacks, doesn't it? Sophia talks about the Roe v. Wade, which is just one of a number of attacks that we're having at the moment. I hear a lot that it feels like the clock is being rolled back on women's rights, and I think that is true, but the way that I prefer to think about it is, I think it feels more like a tug of war, because these ideas are contested within society. I think the atmosphere a month ago, when there was absolutely vile misogyny directed at Amber Heard, that none of us benefit from that, firms lining up to discredit her and attack her and all the rest of it. I think that atmosphere feels very different than it did 5 years ago, when there was the explosion of anger around Me Too, when thousands of women, hundreds of thousands of women across the world said that they demanded to be taken seriously over the question of sexual violence and demanded to be listened to. These present points of crisis for the system, don't they? Because what it does is it partly exposes the limitations of the capitalist system in delivering what, even equality, because before there were MPs in Parliament watching tractors, watching porn in Parliament. There was Westminster. I don't know who remembers that. The dossier of people that were under investigation for harassment, and the rest of it. I think the generation of women before me cannot believe that they are being forced to fight on this terrain, that their abortion rights are being attacked and all the rest of it. But I think actually for my generation and women younger than me, Our lives are harder in lots of ways. Childcare is more expensive. We cannot afford proper housing. We're being paid, less, and all the rest of it. Our abortion access is being attacked. So actually, in lots of ways, things are even worse. And that's why, as revolutionaries, we don't talk about equality under the capitalist system. We talk about revolutionary liberation, because it's not just about challenging people's ideas. It's not just about education, although those things are important. It's about collective struggle, delivering material changes in people's lives. It's about building a system where you remove the incentive for one group of people to oppress another, for those at the top of society to oppress another, to oppress everyone else. It's about building a world where we all have an interest in liberation for everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to go on from the last speaker. I think it's very, very important that comrades understand that men do not benefit from women's oppression. It's very, very important to understand that it is not in our interest for women to be oppressed and in the situations that Sophia described. Also, the other important thing, one point she said, which I think is important as well, is that in any given epoch, the ruling ideas are those of the ruling class. The ideas in our society come from above down, they're fed down, and then they're fed into us from the baby onwards. And I think that's important. But also, Marx said that the emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class itself. In other words, our emancipation is in our hands. We have to fight for it. We have to stand together. So that raises all the questions about how do we fight, what do we fight, what kind of unity we need, etc., etc. But the key thing within the working class, and that's men and women in the working class, is our powerlessness. The important thing is we've got no power to actually do anything about the way that the world treats us, except to struggle against it. And I think in the struggle against it, we learn that the ideas fed to us were wrong. In the struggle itself, we find out that our interests are with our fellow women workers, our fellow gay workers, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, it's in the struggle itself that we begin to throw off what Marx called the filth of ages, all the shit that's in our brains, in our bodies, and in our lives. We begin to throw that off. We throw it off in struggle. At the heart of it all is a struggle. Reforms are great. Education reforms are great. If we have to fight for them, we have to keep them. We have to get rid of SATs. My poor grandson has just gone through massive trauma at 11 because he had to sit a SATs exam. So yes, we have to go against all that. But the important thing is that we have to understand that unity between us is the key, and struggle is the most important thing.
That's great.
Sophia, it's always so nice to hear you speak. You're honestly such a nice speaker and so inspiring. So I just wanted to kind of just echo what kind of people have been saying inside the room. I just think as a young generational person, it's just so boring. It's honestly just so boring to still be having the same conversations, to still be talking about the same sort of thing. And I think that's just kind of it. It's just boring. I just don't really get it, I don't understand it. Well, I do get it, obviously, but it's like I don't really understand, or I can't really comprehend why there has to be this push down, and I guess that kind of comes from my sort of innocence, but it's just really, really sad as well. And I feel like in terms of like fighting in the struggle, it's kind of a, and of course, it's kind of a calling that you have to do. You have to keep calling out on things. You have to comment on sniper comments, which means these little kind of I call them sniper comments, but it kind of means these little comments that are kind of like shot down at. Oh. Okay, little one break. Yeah.
That's it.
Testing. These sniper comments, which I kind of call these comments that kind of like said from above, and you can't really comprehend it until you kind of go home and process what's going on. So I kind of feel like and a lot of people in the room, I'm assuming, have the same kind of thoughts and ideologies. Like we all do have to stick together, and it's not necessarily me as a person of colour having to always fight against this misogyny or this sexism or racism that's happening to me, but it's the people around me as well to kind of call out on it. Especially with like racism and sexism and misogyny. No one's going to say it to me, they're going to say it when I leave the room, especially as a person of colour. So it's up to people as allies to kind of come together and to fight against the cause.
Brilliant.
Jenny, where am I going? You wanted to go?
Yeah.
No, someone else. Sorry. It wasn't me, it was someone else.
Oh, is it me? No, it's you.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
I don't know which one. Sorry, that's all right.
Hi, thank you so much, Sophia. I think it's clear that it's difficult being a woman, isn't it? Especially in this society, it feels like you can't win either way. You know, we walk down the street and we're blamed for whatever happens to us. I mean, I was actually spiked just before Christmas. I was out in central London. It happened. I had loads of stuff stolen off me, so I didn't want to go to the police because I knew what was going to happen. But I had to go to the police, and I got told that if I found any evidence, if there was any CCTV that I found, I should hand it over to the police. Well, I didn't find any CCTV, obviously, because I can't just go up and knock on buildings and ask. But I think that shows the kind of role of the state in our lives. They really don't care. I'm fed up of seeing there's an advert at the moment for the police. Join the police in Essex, and they've got black women, they've got women, they've got gay people like on the advert, and it's to reel us in and think, oh, we're part of them, we're one of them, and we're absolutely not. The state, what they represent, and the tools that protect them, the army, the police, and so on, aren't there to protect us. And so we have to think a bit wider, I think, than the current system we live in, because it is difficult when you're walking down the street, I think, and you get catcalled, or you suffer sexual harassment, or you get spiked. It's really hard, I think, to put that into a wider context of fighting the system. It's because of capitalism. I need to join a picket line and fight back. It's quite isolated, which is why I think it's so nice being in a room full of people who can come together and talk about those experiences and really think about how we can fight back. But when I don't want to have sex with someone, I'm frigid, and when I do, I'm a slut. And I think these contradictions in society are really problematic, aren't they? Because we're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. We can't win either way. If I wear a skimpy top, I ask for it, but actually the majority of people, like Sophia said, domestic abuse happens in the house. People are raped 80% of the time by people that they know, people that they trust. And so when we're told it's our fault, I think it's very unfair, and it's the system trying to blame us for what they're causing. So then we think about, well, what can we do? What can we do? Because these things are isolated. We're meant to feel isolated, we're meant to feel shamed, and we're meant to feel guilty. But I do think the answer is collective action, and I don't want that to just be a throwaway comment.
1 minute.
But I think, thank you, we can see in history when working class people have come together, we've been able to shake off this oppression. Sophia mentioned the Russian Revolution, where working class women had to fight for that right for equality and to argue with the men alongside them that they deserved to fight alongside them. But what happened? Workers took power, there was a revolution, and abortion was legalised, something that's still very far away in 2022, unfortunately. We got divorce rights, we got the right to vote, and all these things. So when working class people take power, there's no need for oppression. The Russian Revolution, Alexandra Kollontai, she wrote a lot about this, and something specific she said that sticks with me is that it's an absolute fantasy for working class women to be wanting to fight alongside ruling class women for our liberation, because although these women face sexism, they don't care when we get beaten up in the street, they don't care when we're exploited and oppressed. We have to stand alongside working class people on the picket lines, on the protests, and that sounds hard, that sounds difficult, because working class people also hold sexist ideas, they come from the top down. But what is clear is that this kind of society we're trying to build is possible, and we have to do that by fighting together.
Brilliant. So can we just take 2 more contributions?
Okay. Well, look, thanks, Sophia, that was brilliant. And I want to pick up on something Sophia said quite early on, because she said women's oppression hasn't always existed. And that's important, because if it hasn't always existed, it means we can actually have a world where it doesn't exist again.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's presented as though it's all natural. These ideas, we just hold them, this is the way the system's organised. And actually it's been very different. And it's absolutely right to say women's oppression arose at a particular point where actually it entwined with the growth of class society and the state as well. Now, we'll go through thousands of years of history, but class societies have taken different forms. It takes a particular form under capitalism where the family is central. And let's be honest, the capitalists fought for the family to exist. It nearly broke down with industrialisation in Britain because, children, women were giving birth in the factories of Manchester, children were put to work. Literally, the average age in Manchester in the 1800s was 17 years old. It was a bit of a worry for the people at the top. Who was going to do all the work? And who would make sure that workers could go to work, healthy, fed, ready to go? And the family is very useful because it's all done for free in the home. So people are ready to go to work each day, they're socialised, ready to do it, and there's a new generation of workers. So it plays this crucial economic role for capitalism. Partly that's why it's been so adaptable. It has changed. It's not the same nuclear family. You can have gay marriage, adoption, IVF actually in same-sex relationships and things. Good, but it's with us because it plays this role. It's not just economic, it's ideological as well. Sophia went into it. This is where ideas are about how we are in society, all of us actually, but for women, nurturing, caring, look after the kids, you're the expert caregiver because that's structured into society. That means you're always ready to help. You're always available. That doesn't end at the walls of your house. When you step out then, actually that's how you're seen in society, isn't it? No wonder people think they can just comment on you on the street. And it intersects with that profit drive at the heart of capitalism, making money out of our bodies as well, commodifying it and how we look coming together. So this is where it comes from. But I want to say, therefore as socialists, we have to challenge all aspects of sexism when it appears. We've got to challenge it.
1 minute.
But also, we have to take a collective response to say, let's kick up to the top. And you see, these where these things link. You might think about the rail strikes, nothing to do with women. Actually, you know, this is about safety. This is about having more staff at stations for women's safety in this society. Actually, if you think about universities where harassment is rife, end those sexist club nights, all the images, have better lighting, let's kick up and fight for those things. But ultimately, we have fought for stuff and they roll it back. They hit back like they are now. The right are coming for us, rolling back our rights. And that's why the conclusion is we're saying women's oppression and sexism is rooted in capitalism. We have to get rid of it. And that means talking about revolutionary change completely, using the power we've talked about and seen a glimpse of, when we are united to fight against that system, bring it down and fight for a completely different world, free of all exploitation and oppression. That's what we stand for in the SWP.
You indicate.
I was interested when you started talking about change and how we get it, and how you talked about protest. And my experience in life has been built on the fact that I took part once in a demonstration where we protested, and it completely changed my life. We took part in a Miss World competition. I mean, not in it, we took part against the holder of the Miss World competition. I'm trying to say the whole learning process to me is like change is possible, but only if we protest like hell all the time and we know why we're doing it. We didn't know till we started the process. And because we went to a conference in Oxford at the time, we had groups where we broke into and we started talking for the first time in our lives about what oppression as women meant. And from that, we felt empowered from that experience of versing what we had been going through that had no name before. And then afterwards, someone suddenly said, let's go to the Miss World contest and stop it. And we thought, fantastic. So we just turned up there. We didn't have much of a plan. There was no phone, there was no, this or that or anything. We just turned up and we just sat through the thing. And then when he came, we protested and stopped the show. And the point is that it was on television and it went round the world.
Yeah.
The whole world saw it.
Yeah.
Many women became feminists in one night just through that. So empowerment can happen if you get together, you discuss your oppression, you decide to do something about it, and then change can happen. Any of us could get out there and change through protest, but protest is the key.
That's great.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to bring Sophia back to sum up. Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Jane. Yeah, thank you everyone who came into that discussion. I thought it was really wide ranging, and look, I'm not going to be able to touch on everything. I know there were still people who wanted to contribute. Like, please come up and here all weekend, have a little chat, and we can talk about some things. But I mean, firstly, I want to come to to your contribution. I mean, thank you firstly for being so kind. I thought you made an excellent contribution as well. And about the household and these sort of two roles that women are assumed to play in it, because I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? It links to what was said down here at the front. It's like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, aren't we, in society? And that means actually we've got to try and look from beyond it. But, you know, I think it's quite interesting actually, because it's right. Like when people talk about sexism and their ideas and their experiences of it, things that happen behind closed doors in a private family home are not the first things that come to your mind. They're not the things that you see on social media or on the TV or reported in the news. But why are they hidden? Well, they're hidden because actually the top and stuff, and the media, they don't want you to know that it all comes from behind closed doors. Now, sometimes there's cracks in the system. Sometimes they do show actually exactly what the role of the family is. Now, look, it's a while ago now, but people might remember a government advert during COVID, which was shocking. I wish, now I'm like, oh, I should have bloody done slides. So like, there was an advert about stay home, stay safe, right in the peak of the pandemic. And in this house, I had 4 lovely big rooms, very unlike most people's houses in the first place. There were sort of model examples of what we should be doing when we're at home. In one room, there was quite visibly a female cartoon playing with some children. In another room, there was, once again, a very visibly female cartoon ironing clothes. In another room, or I think there might have been 3 rooms, there were the 2 rooms, and in the third room, I'm not kidding you on right now, there was a very male cartoon with his feet up on the sofa watching TV. That was a government advert, right? And this came out in 2020. So sometimes they let slip. I mean, I don't know who was in that room and thought, yeah, that's okay, let's put that out. Yeah, that's right on. You know, it's like absolutely ridiculous. But that is really what our role is meant to be within the system. And it's because the family, as others have said, is so entrenched. And I think, you know, what people have spoken about actually people's experiences in schools and school uniform policies, sex education is really important as well. Because really, where's the second place that children are socialised? After the home, it's in school, isn't it? That's also where they pick up their ideas. No wonder they don't teach us radical sex education. You know, as much as Netflix wants to try and do it for us with brilliant TV series, I must say. But that's why they try and hide these things. I mean, in my school, I think it's quite shocking. I went to a girls' school, right? And then in the sixth form, some boys were allowed to come in. And that was when we were told that we weren't allowed to wear vest tops like straps or midriffs because it might distract the boys. We went up in arms. We were like, hang on a minute, this is our bloody school. We've been here for the last 5 years. Our men are coming in, telling us what we can and can't wear. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, but it happens in every single, in every single education space, every single social space that women are in, actually. And I want to talk a little bit about, obviously we've spoken about the role of the family, but I want to talk about how clearly it is important as well for politicians. So I think, someone sort of mentioned how, I think it was with abortions and how it's, completely, how Biden, is not going to do anything about it. And actually, if you look at right-wing politicians, some of which are women, sometimes they are the most sexist, actually. Think about Margaret Thatcher. Famously, yes, exactly, whoever did that. Famously, she said, there is no such thing as society, only individuals and their families. Also, famous people say, if we have female leaders, that's when women will win rights. There'll be less war if women ran the country. Ukraine wouldn't happen if Putin was a woman and Zelensky too, and NATO was run by women. Or actually think about the Falklands War, probably one of the most pointless wars that Margaret Thatcher led in. Then she didn't care about the families over there, did she? And she actually famously, sort of said that she was, the sort of least womanly woman that there is in sort of Parliament and so on. But the point I want to try and make here is that actually when we look to solutions at the top of society, there is no hope. And actually also I want to talk about right-wing policies, because Marine Le Pen is probably one of the leading female politicians at the moment. And this is something that we really have to be careful of, because 3 years ago I went to a talk in this very room about women in the far right. There's an article in the International Socialism Journal. You can find them in the main foyer and backlogs by Judith Orr. I would really recommend it. She's talking tomorrow on abortion rights. But right-wing and far-right politicians, particularly women, they use the cause of women's liberation to mask their Islamophobia. And actually, it has to be clear that every far-right person, every fascist, is a misogynist too. Viktor Orban, Hitler, Le Pen, they all hate women just as much as they hate Muslims and refugees. And misogyny is always bound up with right-wing policies. And I think talking about right-wing policies, I want to bring it back home to Boris Johnson and what the Tories are doing to us. Because another quote that Boris Johnson said, it was in 2005 on the campaign trail. He said that if people vote Tory, it will cause your wife to have bigger breasts and increase your chances of owning a BMW. Now, somebody should hold him to account, because that's not what happened when people vote Tory, is it? We know what happens when people vote Tory. We've had over a decade of it. What happens when people vote Tory? We face cuts. We face racism. We face pandemics with little to no help. With little to absolutely no help. We face the rich getting richer, whilst people like cleaners and train drivers have to go out on strike. And also what we face, and I think I'm happy that people spoke about the police in the discussion, we face the Tories giving more powers to an institution that uses and abuses their power to bully people, to be racist, to be sexist, and to murder people. And actually, the police and the justice system is something we have to address, because actually, if with the new police crime and sentencing bill, if it is the case that you can get more time in jail for pulling down a statue of a slave owner than you can for raping someone, then something is wrong. The justice system is not working in the way it should do. Likewise, in America, you can now get more jail time for getting an illegal abortion than you can do for committing sexual abuse against a child in some states. That is shocking, absolutely shocking. But what it shows, actually, is that some people say the system's broken. The system's not broken. The system is doing exactly the job that it was set up to do. That system is not designed for us. It's not designed for the majority. And, you know, people spoke about a tug of war of rights. That's exactly what we have. It's not just women's rights under attack. It's every single person, like all of the struggles we've heard yesterday at the opening rally. And actually that means, you know, we have a fight. That means that, the idea that abortion rights, right, something that women fought for 50 years ago, can be taken away should shock us. Yeah. And any right can be taken away. And I think what that means is that if you haven't already become a member of the Socialist Workers' Party this weekend, filled out one of these rev forms, you should really think about it. Because actually, if you agree with what's been said in this room, I'm going to call you out, but if you're like Jade at the back, who is fed up, who is bored of actually the system and going over this same crap, you know, if you'd like to see a different world, then, you know, we need more revolutionaries. You may have already been asked. We asked you because we mean it. We need more of us to be part of the struggle to actually change the world and win the liberation that we've spoken about. And I just want to finish with two quotes. One quote from a woman called Rosa Luxemburg. She said that we face a crisis in society, a transgression into socialism or a regression into barbarism. Now, she said that in the end of the 1917, 1919, I'm not going to get my date exactly right, I don't know the exact date she said the quote. But she was proved right because she saw the barbarism of the 30s in Germany. But actually, we are at barbarism right now. Capitalism is a violent, barbaric system. It is barbaric that families are torn apart and sent to Rwanda. It is barbaric that millions of women in America are being forced to use illegal abortions. It is absolutely barbaric that the police are murdering women on the streets. So actually, that means we have to change the world. And the final quote that I want to finish with is a man called Vladimir Lenin, the Bolshevik leader and revolutionary, because he said, when he was talking about the Bolsheviks in 1917, he said that the success of a revolution depends on the role that women play within it. And actually, I would like to see that revolution sooner rather than later. So you should think about joining us and continuing the discussions and have a great rest of the weekend. So yeah, thank you everyone.